Welcome to Israel. Why is the Middle East important? We Christians are the Notzrim, according to most Jews today. We are the watchers on the wall. Our purpose as members of the Commonwealth of Israel is to serve and protect God's people. After the formation of the world, God enacted a plan, and that plan began in the Middle East at the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And that plan concludes in that same place. The context of the entirety of God's plan begins and completes in and with Israel. There is no denying that, nor refuting it if you are a Jew or a Christian, and the anthropological evidence verifies it. For the purposes of this podcast, Israel is both a nation and a people. A current event that's going on in Israel as we speak right now, and this is in June, in mid-June, we're doing this podcast. But something about a weapon that Israel is using against Hezbollah in the Lebanon. What's going on there?
Right. Well, I think it's very interesting that, as we said right before we started, that Israel is employing a 15th century weapon called a trebuchet. 15th century weapon. So in the 1400s, they used to, it's basically a catapult.
Okay.
And Israel's using it.
Okay.
And why is that important, Jeff?
There you go.
Because, again, so often when we're parsing through end-time scenarios, it talks of horses and bridles and blood flow up to a horse's bridle and the armies of God on horses and God on a horse. It always made me wonder, at least, wow, do we degenerate to horses and that kind of weaponry? I mean, it was only, like we said before we started, 100 years ago, the First World War, they had cavalry.
They did. They were still on horses.
They were still on horses.
That's right.
So anyway.
And then somebody went and invented the tank, and that kind of changed things. But yeah, it's pretty amazing. So, what's your take on the point of them using it? Well,
I don't know the point, but it makes me wonder: is this something we'll see in the future? That in fact, the written Bible scriptures that referencing these end time scenarios, warfare, etc., are far more literal. Than we've given them credit for.
So that might be.
It might be. I'm not saying it is.
Gotcha.
I'm not saying it's not. It's just
but you're wondering.
makes me wonder, and I've wondered for years.
Yeah.
You know,
it's interesting that they would do that in such an advanced technological age.
Right.
That they would revert to a 14th century weapon.
Right. For any purpose.
For any purpose at all.
Right.
So it's really interesting to talk about. So today, Neil, we're going to talk about the Shema.
Right.
Now, the Shema, we'll probably do more than one show on this, folks, so pay attention closely. But, Neil, the Shema is a prayer, right?
It is a prayer, and, Jeff, you said, what's a Shema? It's not a schmuck.
It's not a schmuck.
It's different than a schmuck.
I've met schmucks. I know what a schmuck is.
The central prayer of Judaism, modern Judaism, and going back many, many centuries now, many years, is the Shema. And it is the prayer, the central tenet of Jerusalem. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God.
Before you started, I want to ask you this question, because when we get into it, it just really touched me when we discussed it and I read through it. This is something that God gave them, right? God gave the Israelites. Is that correct?
Right.
He gave it to them.
Sure.
This is what you shall pray.
It's contained in the Torah.
And it's shall, right? Which means it's a moral imperative. Shall is right. Should is a word that we use that comes from shall. And when we say should to people, there's a new thing about don't should people, right? Don't tell people what they should do. Well, I think I should do that when I'm giving them a moral imperative that's absolute. For example, do not steal, right? I can say that because it's absolute morality. It should. But so this is one of those things. When God gave them the 10, He said, "You shall pray this prayer."
Right. And shall, is it you should do that, like you shall do that, or is it an imperative? Right. But nonetheless, it's contained within the Torah.
Yeah, the Torah.
At different places, the Torah. And it starts, it is about the Lord our God. The Lord is one. That's the central tenet.
And is it repeated in Deuteronomy?
It's in Deuteronomy.
Okay.
And it comes from Deuteronomy, and it comes in 3 sections.
Okay.
And so it's a 3-part prayer, actually.
So briefly, what are the 3 sections? What would you title each of them?
Well, the 3 sections are Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9 is the first section. It's always the first. Deuteronomy 11, 13 through 21 is the next section, if you will, that makes up this
Would you call that
Torah.
something? Would you give that a name, that middle section? That second section?
I've called it something myself.
What do you call it?
Well, I just, if this is what you're asking me, I've called it, for our purposes here, the first part of the Shema comes, it says who God is and what does He require.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Right. And that's the first part.
And the second part is what?
And
what do you think about that one?
The second part of the Shema,
folks, I've got Neil tap dancing right now. He's not prepared for me to do this. It's okay,
is the blessing that comes from simply following after God.
Oh my!
And that's the second part of the Shema.
That's the second part, the blessing that comes from following God.
And that's found in Deuteronomy 11, 13 through 21.
Wow!
And then the third part, because I know you're going to ask this. If you ask me 1 and 2, the third part is God keeps us and reminds us of who He is and who we are.
Who He is and who we are.
Right, and that part comes from Numbers 15. And all of those sections make up the central part, make up the Shema.
The Shema. Those are 3 powerful points. 3 very, very powerful points that So Neil, the importance of this to a Christian, to a follower of Jesus, it was for sure important to Jesus, right?
Right.
I mean,
Absolutely.
And the apostles prayed it.
Right.
The apostles of Jesus prayed it.
Right.
Most of the Jews that followed him after they became followers of Jesus, I'm not saying the word Christian, right? Followers of Jesus, they continued to pray it.
Sure.
Jesus continued to pray it.
Of course.
But what happened to the rest of it? Where did it go?
Well, I mean, all of it is contained in the Torah.
Yeah.
So the early followers would have been diligent followers of all of the Torah. And so if the central part today, and for centuries in the past, no telling when it actually became the Shema, the central focus of Judaism, they would have been just as diligent to read and follow and say the Shema. They knew it.
They knew it.
They knew the whole thing.
Probably memorized it, wouldn't you say?
And had memorized it. And far more memorized than people do today, because they were very biblically literate.
Yeah.
They understood when there was a reference to something, and they understood, even though Jesus might, in the New Testament, make a reference offhand to something, his audience, believers and non, would have heard exactly what his reference was and would have filled in the blanks, as it were, with the entirety of his...
Because they had the context of being a Jew.
Right. They had that context of whether it was from the Torah or from the prophet Isaiah or anywhere else.
So much that we don't understand because we don't have that context, which is why we do this show. That's why we do it, to help Christians to grasp a Jewish context for their faith, because it is the foundation for their faith.
Right. That's exactly what we're talking about. Is in this case talking specifically about the Shema. It is a central prayer, but it has such meaning throughout the prayer that most Christians
are profound language in the prayer.
Not even aware of how central this is to modern Jewish thought.
It's to me, it's so amazing, and I think about this idea that, and we're going to get into it in a second here, but I just think it's good to preamble it for us. We're going to, this idea of who God is, right? And and that tells you who he's not, right? Who he is tells you what he's not,
right,
if you pay attention, right?
Correct.
Okay. And you're living in a society of dominance and multiple gods, right? All the way through, up until Judaism established itself, right? There were multiple gods.
Right.
All over the place.
Yes, that's correct.
And they still might exist, or a form of them, or some kind of spirits, who knows, right? But it's out there, right? But what this prayer does is it solves the issue. It's very specific. It's very detailed. It's hard to come away not understanding after you read it. After you read
the prayer, but also if you just even say, that's the prayer found within the Torah.
Right.
So all of the Torah is important.
All of the Torah is important.
They focused on this prayer.
Right.
Sort of like in the New Testament, we have the Lord's Prayer, and some Christians know the Lord's Prayer, but that's all they know.
Well, I was thinking that exact thing. We all memorize the Lord's Prayer as kids, right? And I've never been in a situation where somebody said, let's pray the Lord's Prayer. Everybody knows it.
Everybody knows it. Yeah. And that's kind of like in the Jewish mindset of this portion of the Torah, wherein God says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. So it's...
you got my attention, Neil.
Yeah.
So tell me, give me some bits from that first part of it, which is who is God. It's about who is God.
Okay, well, let's see here. The thing to do would be the opening verse and the response
Go for it.
Is the most recognizable by Jew and non-Jew.
Yep.
And it's traditionally you sing the opening verse with your hand over your eyes, and you sing the second verse much lower in an undertone with your hand kind of over your mouth. It's recited twice a day, and what it is, or what people may recognize, is the part of the prayer that starts out is Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kavod, Malchuto, Leolam Vaed. That is the opening part of the Shema that's sung. The rest is said.
Okay.
But that's sung, invariably, traditionally sung, just like I sang it.
Yep.
Maybe better.
You did a great job, by the way.
Maybe better. But
what is the English translation?
Translated, it is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And in the Hebrew, it says, Yud He Vav He, the ineffable name. We say Yahweh, say what you will, Jehovah, however you transliterate that.
Right.
Yud He Vav He, Yahweh, Elohim, Yahweh, Echad. And that means the Lord, our God, the Lord is one.
Echad is one.
Echad is one.
Hebrew. Okay.
Is one.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Oh, wow. And so here is the word that attracted me right away. Jesus used the word here a lot.
A lot.
Right?
Right.
When he was saying something he wanted us to remember, let he who has ears hear. And I'm curious as to how Hebrew looks at this word at the beginning of this prayer.
Well, the beginning of the prayer, and it's interesting because you're right, Jeff, in the last book of the Bible is Revelation. And I find it fascinating that throughout the messages in that book, God says, hear, listen.
Yes.
And don't just listen like a noise,
right,
but as you said, appropriate this, hear this, get this message. And throughout, so here we have the last book of the Bible is repeating the first books of the Bible. That really tells me, well, wait a minute, you mean it's a composite whole? He didn't start
full
over?
Circle?
Yeah,
what? Hello?
Yeah, right. So here we have
Wait a minute. But
Shema.
that Old Testament, we're done with that.
Yeah,
we're done with it. We don't need that anymore. Where is that referred to in the New Testament? Oops, wait a minute.
Right.
In Revelation.
Right.
Oh, my.
Yeah. The sarcasm innuendo was not lost on me. I got it entirely, and that's what my intention was to say, look, it's repeated again, 90 years or so after Jesus' death, John is again saying, here, 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 or the revelation to him where he was caught up into a heavenly realm, a different dimension.
So
they
you're
were
saying
listen,
God hasn't changed.
God hasn't changed.
He had not changed. He was the same God.
Right.
To John.
Right. And that's exactly what this Shema Yisrael is saying. Israel, listen up. Don't miss it. Listen, Israel. Shema Yisrael. Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. The Lord your God, the Lord is one. And that's exactly what Jesus said, didn't he? In other words, so the end books are just like the first books and vice versa, and it's a composite. There you go.
And it's consistent. It doesn't change. It's the same.
It's the same. It's just humanity, us. We change, and we are.
And then we change it.
And we try to figure out.
Make it be what we want it to be. Everybody wants a God that's like them.
Sure, of course.
Everybody does.
Of course.
It's natural.
Of course, absolutely.
Yeah. But it's not the way it works.
It's not the way it works, and this Shema, it's so important to get. There's so much meaning in there. There's so much innuendo. There's so much being said in this Shema, and Jesus followed it.
Yeah.
He followed the Torah.
Well, we're going to prove that as we go through it a little bit. But let me ask you this. Where in Deuteronomy would I begin to read this?
Yes, it's Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9. That's the beginning of it.
Okay. Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9. Okay. So if anybody's interested in going there, they can do that. But go ahead. Continue on a little bit with the Lord is one. And then what follows that right away? Well,
it's so important to know that the Lord is one. And what follows that is that one, Jews have traditionally put that meaning as one, meaning only one.
Not another.
Not another.
Right.
Christians or Christianity has said it's a triunity of oneness. And again, that's because we embrace the New Testament, if you will.
That's right.
The further revelation of God through His Son, Jesus. That's what Christians believe. So, echad, it does mean one. It can also mean a plurality of one. So
that's interesting that it's in the Hebrew that way.
It's in the Hebrew that way. It's many, many ways you can interpret, just like I'm assuming other languages.
In Greek, it's I and the Father are one. When Jesus says I and the Father are one, he's saying they're the same thing. That's the one that's referred to there.
And we see that where you're referencing is in John 10. Jesus said, "My sheep listen to my voice." So there again, we have the listening. Listen to my voice. I and the Father are one.
Are one.
Now, what you have to think about as one, and nobody understands it entirely. We just don't. But if I said, well, think of a car. When you say that's my car, that's your car, that's a car is made up of many different parts.
Many parts.
But it's still one car. It's a plurality of things, but it's one. And that's what Jesus was saying. Now, Jews, on the other hand, they focused on just one because Christians, and it's a long history, they believe in multiple gods, you might hear. And one of them's a woman, Mary, and they worship her, and blah, blah, blah.
That's Jewish belief.
That can be some sects.
Some Jews believe that.
Some Jews believe that. And our point is just, echad here can mean a plurality of one. Yes, it is one. And nobody understands the Trinity exactly. Anybody who tells you they do, Jeff, I always say, wish them well and walk away as fast as you can.
As you can.
But it's a plurality of one. It's a composite oneness. Back to our thing here about Hear, O Israel. It's much more, though, than just saying simply, hear, listen to me, listen to what I say. It's concentrate, focus your attention, strive to understand, stop looking about, stop speaking, and apply the voice beneath the extrinsic noise. Listen to what I'm telling you. Stop. And that's very hard for modern man to do.
It is.
We all think we stop and listen, but very, very few of us listen to what somebody else is saying. It's almost a skill.
Well, I think you can tell by the response people give you whether they're really listening or not.
Oh, sure.
And the biggest response that I get that tells me people are listening is they ask questions. You know, when somebody asks me a question about something I said, it tells me they're interested and they want to know more.
But to really listen, to really hear what's being said, whether you embrace it or not is a separate issue.
Right.
But that is what the Shema Israel is saying. Listen up, stop, listen to what I'm saying, apply this. And that's what the Shema is at its heart.
It means hear.
It means
Shema
hear.
means
Listen.
hear.
Listen or hear.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hear
Got it.
Israel. Shema Israel. Hear me.
So then the prayer is the listening. It's what it would be called.
That's right. That's entirely what it is. The Shema is the central part of Israel about hear, O Israel. Hear this. And this is where we get our first hint, if you will, what I've said to you before. Right in the Shema, the very heart. Now, I'm not saying Jews would embrace this, but we can see, as most believers, we would say, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is alone, or is one, or is this plurality of oneness, if you will. But right there it says the Lord, that's one.
Yes.
Our God, that's two.
Yes.
The Lord is three, is one.
How about that?
So right there you have this thing right in the Shema. Now, I'm not saying Jews would look at that and say, oh, you've interpreted that correctly, but the Hebrew says Yahweh, Elohim, Yahweh, Echad. Yahweh, Elohim, Yahweh, Echad. Why, if the Bible doesn't waste words, right? Why would it say Yahweh, Elohim, Yahweh 3 times, one? Why would it say that? So for me as a believer, I say, well, that does this mystical thing called a hint at the Trinity.
That's right. Exactly.
And God said,
it's right there in their midst. They don't see it,
and
but
God
it's there.
said, listen, hear, listen, Israel. Now, what's important for us is that no way does that do away with Israel.
Right.
But that's what some people try to take it. Well, they've missed it. They didn't hear. So therefore, I'm the new Israel because I heard. No, we don't. That's an aside, but that's what we want to be careful of whenever we talk about any of these concepts.
Yes. Okay. So, Neil, the first part you said is about God. What else does it say about God that we need to remember?
Well, I don't know if you want to read this or not.
Well, we don't have to, but if you could summarize it, that would be great.
Well, what it says about God is a number of things. It says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one.
Yeah.
You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your might. It's imperative that we love the Lord our God with all our heart, all our soul, all our might, or it's sometimes called resources. Strength or might can also be called resources.
Everything you've got.
Everything you've got.
Love him with everything you've got.
And the reality is, Jeff, none of us can do that.
Yeah.
You can't do that.
No, we can't.
There's no way.
But we can aim at it.
We always are to aim and to strive to do that. But it says what's important is that the resources, might or strength, and you're saying everything with your heart, your strength.
Jesus said your mind as well.
Your mind. Some people will jeopardize their life in the pursuit of riches, but they will never, ever knowingly put their resources at risk.
It's very, 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 very difficult for people to do.
It's almost impossible. I'm not going to put my resource. And we have an example of this when the rich young ruler came to Jesus and he said, hey, you only lack one thing. Now, Jesus, some people take this that you should not have any funds at all. Other people think you should be rich. I'm not going to go into that whole theology, but nonetheless, Jesus said, for you, you lack one thing. For you.
For you, you lack one thing.
And he said, go sell all you have. Because Jesus was going to take that rich young ruler under his wing, as it were. Many people asked Jesus if they could join him, and he didn't allow it.
And that's what the other apostles did. They gave up everything to follow him.
To follow him. But this rich young ruler had plenty, and it was very hard to give up his resources because he couldn't see the end from the beginning, as it were.
So when Jesus was talking to Peter and John, was it John or Andrew? I forget. But anyway, when he was talking to them, he said, put down your nets and follow me.
Yeah.
Same exact order.
It's the exact same thing. It's put your resources at risk. Step out in faith, as it were. And Jesus said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be. That's in Matthew 6, yes. Where your treasure is.
Whatever you value most.
If Peter and Andrew wouldn't have put down their nets, they couldn't have taken that next step.
Could not.
And that's part of, in the Shema, loving the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your resources.
And Jesus tells the parable of the feast, right? He tells the guy who's going to have a feast, I can't go, I've got to go to my wedding. I can't go, I've got to plow my field. I can't go. It's the same thing.
Right.
They're asked to lay all that down and follow and come to the feast, and they won't.
And they won't. And it's a hard thing to do personally for anybody to say, I'm going to step out in faith. A lot of people think presumption is faith. They think if I do this, then God will do that. It's the reverse if-then. It's if I do, then God will, as opposed to God saying, if you do, then I will, right?
So I think we got a pretty good idea about who God is. He's absolute. He's pure. He's loving. He's all the things it says he is. And he's worthy of being followed absolutely.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the point of part one, right?
Of part one of the Shema, for sure. And it does go on in the part one, and it says, you shall bind these on your hand and let them serve as a symbol on your forehead. Inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. That's the last sentence, if you will, of the opening part of the prayer of the Shema. And it's just important to know that some people will be against this, but the Jews take this literally. This is a command of God, and they take this tefillin, or phylacteries as they're known, and they wind them around their hand and arm with a small box worn on the forehead, which is contained within it the Shema. The Shema is in this thing right on their forehead, but it says right there, bind them as a sign on your hand.
As a what?
And serve them as a symbol on your forehead.
A sign and a symbol of?
Well, of what the Shema entails. And
which it entails, Hear, O Israel, God is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength, all your resources. That's what it symbolizes. That you're doing that,
and you're not just doing it religiously, if you will.
You're really doing it.
It's saying to do this, and so inside the box, as we said, are verses from the Shema. It also has meaning because it says here that the mezuzah, which you'll find in most Jewish homes. It does mean doorpost in Hebrew, and that's what the Shema says. Put these on your doorpost. There's a small box called this mezuzah, and it's usually attached to the right of a house, and oftentimes you'll see even in movies, and you might miss it if you're not looking for it, but people will walk past it, touch it, and then maybe kiss their hand or something. So it's also in many rooms of a house, and it's always on the right side of the door. It's on the mezuzah, the lintels of the house, if you will, going in. And that's exactly what the Shema says. Write these on the doorposts of your heart.
So, Neil, before we're getting close to the end of this podcast, let's skip to the second point. What's the second point of the Shema? You said the first point was, this is who God is. The second point is... Oh,
so now you're saying what I wrote is saying the blessing that comes with simply following after God.
The blessing that comes from following after him. So now we know who he is. This middle part is the blessing. God describes the blessings that come from following him. And what are some of those, if you could summarize a little?
Well, some of them is a promise to the land. That's the big thing, that especially today in our day.
The land itself is a blessing.
It's a promise to the land,
Yes.
and the land would produce good. It would rain. It would produce its crops. It would be a good land. But again, in the second part, it again says, tie them, meaning the phylacteries or the tefillin, and bind them on your forehead. Tie them on your hands and bind them on your forehead. And then it goes on from there again.
So we know that when God repeats himself, he means it.
Well, he means it. He does.
That's why he repeats himself.
He does say in here what to do with the second part of the Shema. It's in 3 parts, just as we said the triunity is in 3 parts at the very beginning of the Shema. So
it also talks in this part of it, if I'm not mistaken, please correct me if I'm wrong, that if I do these things, then I will receive these blessings?
These blessings, right.
If I follow what I'm told, things will go well for me.
Right. And that's what we said.
Told by God, I should say.
That's what we said. They're known as God, who does that often in Scripture. He says, if then. If you, then I. Yeah. If you don't, then I.
That's the nature of a covenant. That's what a contract is.
Right.
That's what a covenant is.
That's a covenant. Yeah. And it's an unbreakable covenant, but within the Shema is these promises to the land, promises, we'll get to this, but about the tzitzit, the fringe on your garment, promises of tie them on your hands and forehead. Yep. And many people have seen these photos, these pictures of Jews with tefillin and so on.
They have. So, Neil, I think this is a point where we'll pick it up in the middle of number 2 of the middle part. We'll pick it up in the middle of that. We're almost done with it, but let's do that. And then we'll talk in our next episode about who we are. Who does this prayer say we are? And I just want to say one thing in parting here about the land. I was in a small group, prayer group recently, and we were talking about the land, because Israel's in the news and so forth, and it was a bright thing that happened to me. I guess I'm stupid, because I didn't see it. But Jacob had settled in Canaan with his family and grew and thrived there, his family, in Canaan, in the land. They were in the land. And then when things got tough, they left the land and went to Egypt because they thought maybe they could get something there, right? But they left their home. And the whole Exodus story is about the return to their home.
Correct.
I always looked at it like they were in Egypt for a long time, and then they went to the brought back, and they had to conquer these people in order to get that land back, or get that land, because that was the land God promised them. I didn't get the connection that they already had it.
Right.
They already had the land.
They already had the land.
So they weren't. Yes. They were reclaiming it. They weren't. They weren't stealing it from the people they conquered, the Canaanites that they conquered. They were taking back what was theirs.
Right. Correct.
And that just blew me away. But you talk about the land as one of the blessings.
It is one of the blessings.
So folks, stay tuned. We'll be right back. Well, we won't be right back, but we'll be back with another installment about the rest of this Shema, which I hope you do not miss. Stay tuned for a special Hebrew blessing at the end of every episode, including this one. This has been a great discussion. I look forward to how it continues to unfold. As you can tell, Neil and I enjoy talking about the subject as it helps us to get to the root of the matter about God and why Israel and the Middle East are so important. Thank you for listening to this podcast, and we would love to hear from you. Visit us at our home at podbean.com. Israel, why is the Middle East important? That's podbean.com. Israel, why is the Middle East important? And you can find us any place great podcasts can be found. And you can find us on Facebook using the same title. And you can email us at whyisthemiddleeastimportant@gmail.com. That's whyisthemiddleeastimportant@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And if you like what you hear, please invite your friends to the conversation. You know, one thing Neil and I always say to each other is, I don't know, because it is by having an opinion, yet holding it with an open hand, that we continue to grow. Shalom. See you next time. Wait for the blessing.
Lecha